And welcome back, George Norrie with astrophysicist Adam Frank. His book is called The Little Book of Aliens. Adam, we're looking at just what's happening today with artificial intelligence. Jump started 10,000 years, a million years. What could extraterrestrials have with artificial intelligence? They would probably be sending robots here instead of real live biological beings, don't you think?
Yeah, that's a real possibility. In the book, I talk about the possibility that, when how long, here's the question that I explore. How long is the biological era of any species, right? So you can imagine that species everywhere that become intelligent go through the same process we went of, first developing technologies to harvest energy. And then they discover computing. They discover how to do things in silicon. And, how quickly before either they learn how to download themselves into silicon, which, into computers, or that the computers, as we always worry about, just are like, we're done with you. Thank you very much. So it's really possible that the first intelligence we find will be silicon-based, non-biological rather than biological. I think a lot of people think that's possible, and we try to explore some of that in the research, and I certainly unpack that in the book.
Well done, by the way. Let's take some calls. Ted, it is truck driving in Oklahoma. Welcome to the show. Hi, Ted.
Yeah, hey, good to be with you, gentlemen. I'm a magician as well. I'm out here crossing the country in the cruise and illusion. And Adam, if I could be frank with you, I'm as well. I'm a hardcore agnostic. And when I think of scientists right away, SRI, Stanford Research Institute, comes to mind. And Uri Geller, how he convinced them all he could read minds and bend spoons and that sort of thing. So my question to you is, have you not heard of Bob Lazar, who's been talking about reverse engineering machines for, 20 years or so?
Yeah, I've heard of Bob. I've heard of Bob Lazar's work. But from the scientific perspective, it's not out there, right? We don't have it's not like he's passing the machines around to laboratories all over the world. So for, as I said, scientists, we're really brutal with each other about evidence and the claims that you can make from evidence. And, that's why for scientists, there's nothing there for us to work on. And so we work on the stuff. What really you want as a scientist is you want something that can take you to the next question, right? You want a question that you can answer, that you have the tools to answer, and then that question leads to the next question. And that's really what we're looking for when we do these studies of alien planets. That's why we, this amazing capacity of the James Webb Space Telescope to see into the atmospheres of alien worlds.
Adam, I had a guest last night. She claims that she has been abducted by ET since she was a little girl. She's an adult now, claims that she has had at least 3 hybrid children that are very mean. She met them, she claims. And, it's an incredible story. I mean, and sure, people would say that's far out, but what say you to that?
Well, again, the idea, I can never tell somebody that what they saw or what their experience didn't happen because I wasn't there. And personal stories, personal narratives, you can't do anything with those with science, right? I mean, it's like telling a ghost story. Somebody can tell you a really good ghost story. It could be somebody, you trust and everything, and it raises the hair on the back of your neck. But I'm not going to be able to build a computer out of that, right? I'm not going to be able to build a cell phone out of that. The way we've had this amazing progress with science over the last 400 years because we developed this way of having public knowledge. And so what I'm interested in, I don't really want to believe, I want to know. And what I love about science, what gets me up every morning, is there's things I can actually know and then I can share with people and they can confirm that or tell me I'm wrong, and we have a way of having that dialogue. So those kinds of stories, there's not much I can say about them. What I want to focus on, and I want people to focus on in the book, I'm trying to show people where the science has taken us. Like all these extra planets, we know that there are all these crazy kinds of planets out there that 10 years ago we didn't even know they existed.
What percent of scientists, if you polled them, would say there is intelligent extraterrestrial life out there in other solar systems on other planets? What do you think that percent would be?
Yeah, I think when it comes, intelligence is the real question. I think if you ask people, scientists, is there just life, like microbial life? I think most would tend to agree with that. And the reason for that, we have a good reason for thinking that. In the history of the Earth, for the first 500 million years after it formed, was really, a molten hell, right? It was just literally a magma ocean. And almost as soon as it cooled, at around 4 billion years ago, within a couple 100 million years, we think life appeared. So it's like as soon as the Earth was ready for life, we got microbes. And because of that, you can kind of argue from probabilistic reasons that that'll happen anywhere. But it took a long time to get intelligence, right? We didn't get intelligence, especially technology, until 3.5 billion years later. So that makes some scientists more skeptical about intelligence being common, whereas they're not so skeptical about, just sort of what I call dumb life, microbes, forests, and things.
Now, here's the toughest question you'll ever be asked in your career, Adam. Where does God fit into this?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other question, right, about whether or not you want to have a sense of, of either deity or just whether or not science can, the question, can science explain everything? And, I think that's very much a personal choice. When we're asking these questions from a scientific point of view, we don't have to have any hypothesis about that, right? Now, for myself, I'm actually a Buddhist. Actually, that's for the last 30 years, which is a religion that doesn't necessarily have an idea about deity. But I certainly am someone who, my first book was about science and what I would call spiritual endeavor. But what's great about this question about life is that we don't have to answer that question. That question is independent of how we're going to go about our scientific investigations. And that's what most of the book is about what we've learned and what we're about to learn from those investigations. Don't
ever ask the Dalai Lama how he wants his pizza. He would say,
everything on it.
That's right, one with everything.
One with everything.
Catherine in Canada, welcome to the show. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, George. Hi. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Catherine.
I'm curious I got a question that's really funny. but
I'm a funny question.
I think if it was proven there's a spaceship in some guy's garage and they proved it to you, what music do you think that would be blaring out of that spaceship? I think it would be Styx because they would love the keyboards. But I'm curious to know what you think they would like. Thank you.
That song was just in my head, Come Sail Away. That's Styx, right?
Yeah.
That's Styx. Yeah, that was the other day. I was driving my wife crazy because I was singing that. But I think because I'm from New Jersey, that it would be Born to Run. Right? Wouldn't that be the best song if you're going to travel between the stars? So that's my bet. As a New Jerseyan and lifelong Bruce Springsteen fan, that's my vote.
I love it. Next up, we've got Charles in California. Take it away, Charles.
Hi there. And before I even ask my question, I just want to agree with George. I think that we are being visited by biobots. I don't think the ETs themselves will want to venture down here, but they certainly would send biobots, either some kind of silicon or some other organic mechanism. Anyway, my question is this two, I'm going to squeeze them in. First one is about quasars. These are these extremely luminous objects at the very edge of the universe. Nobody can really explain what they are, and there's a lot of theories. My theory is that these are like leftover chunklets of the Big Bang as it was exploding, but that's just my limited theory. The other one is about cold proteins, and these are protein-like molecules, and we scan these from afar. They're everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of organic building blocks, sub-proteins, that are just kind of like floating around out there. So that would suggest that life is much more common than we might think it is. Any thoughts?
Well, for the quasars, quasars are super cool astronomical objects. As you say, they are very, very distant. They're, halfway across or even more to the edge of the visible universe. We do have some pretty good ideas now about them, and we think that they are giant black holes that are like 6 billion times the mass of our own sun. And there's huge amounts of, since we're looking so far back in time with the quasar, we're seeing them as they were at the early stages of the universe when there was a lot of matter pouring into the black hole, and that produces a lot of light. Before the matter makes it into the black hole, it heats up, it emits light, and that's why we think they're so bright and can be seen across the universe. About your point about the organic matter in space is a very good one. In interstellar clouds, with clouds where stars form, you can see all kinds of molecules, all kinds of complex molecules. I mean, there's water and there's alcohol, which means it's a giant vodka martini. But more than that, people have found building blocks for amino acids. They've even found amino acids. So it is true that when planets form, raining down on them are all the sort of prebiotic chemicals you need to make life. And that is one reason why many people are hopeful or think that it might be quite possible that life could be quite common in the universe.
Would you say that life, in terms of the commonality, Adam, would need to have similar elements to exist? I mean, could there be a civilization that breathes ammonia instead of oxygen?
That is a great question, George. This question of life as we don't know it is one that I deal a lot with in the book because it's kind of the most fascinating possibility to stretch your imagination around. And there are ways, there's reasons why if life were starting from scratch, you'd choose carbon, right? There's, you look at carbon on the periodic table, that thing that we all ignored in high school, and carbon is just very promiscuous. It builds these great bonds with pretty much everybody else. So there's a reason why life on Earth chose carbon or why water is so prevalent for life. But it doesn't mean that on other planets, more exotic things might have happened. So as you say, ammonia rather than water, silicon rather than carbon, those are all possibilities that we have to explore, and people are exploring. And I cover in the book so people can see that, to think about life scientifically, you have to sort of you have to use your imagination, but you constrain it with the laws of physics and chemistry.
First-time caller Brendan's with us in British Columbia, Canada. Hey, Brendan, go ahead, sir.
Hey, awesome show, Adam and George. Best show on earth. I just want to say, what an original name for your book. Why don't you just call it The Black Mailbox? And the other thing I want to say, David Grush actually stated in the congressional hearing that they did recover alien bodies, and he could go into more deal if they had use of a skiff.
Again, as I said, unfortunately, those claims have been made since the 1950s. And so there's nothing, and for everybody who makes a claim like that, I can, find another guy in the military who says that's not true. In the book, I talk about that history, actually, of, sort of within the military and intelligence, they literally had a name for it. There was the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and then there was the no, there's not. No, it's not. So as a scientist, there's just, I'm glad they're having those hearings. Look, I hope that we can get to the bottom of it. I hope that, I'm all for transparency, but I have a real feeling that, 10 years from now, we're still going to be having the same conversation, and there still won't be any hard data, like a piece of evidence that you could send to labs all around the world for us to be able to do that investigation. So let's see what happens. But my bet is that we're going to have evidence about life on alien planets using the James Webb Space Telescope, or really what comes after it, before we actually get the government to admit anything about anything.
If we find life out there, Adam, whether it's intelligent or microbial, what do you think the public would react? How do you think they'd react?
Yeah, this is how I end the book. I think it would be the most important discovery in the history of humanity. I don't think people would be rioting in the streets, but I do think it would really rewire our conception of ourselves. And that's what's so beautiful and hopeful about this search, is it would make us recognize that we were part of a community of life. Even if it doesn't matter about intelligence, just knowing that what happened on Earth wasn't an accident, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, George, what's really interesting about life is I'm a physicist. That's my training, is as a physicist. And life is so different from non-life. Right? Mountains, comets, black holes are very interesting, but only life invents, only life creates, only life goes beyond itself. So just finding any example of life in the universe, knowing that we're not the only time this has happened, that would mean that, life is, if we find one other example, life is common, I would think. One example tells us there's lots of examples, and then who knows what's possible.
Adam, if you jumped in a time machine and had a chance to go back and talk with Albert Einstein, what would you talk with him about?
I have actually questions with him about, this is going to sound really nerdy and technical, but I'd like to know about energy conservation in general relativity. This is a point of that's sort of an open issue in general relativity, how energy is conserved, or is energy conserved in general relativity. So I have some technical details I'd like to ask him about, and then I'd want to talk to him about quantum mechanics, because he always had a problem with quantum mechanics. And I'd really like to, kind of pick his brain about, especially where we are now. I'd like to show him where we are now, and I'd love to ask him what he thinks about that.
You think you'd be impressed with him?
With Einstein?
Yes.
Oh, my God. Yeah, George, when I first really understood what he'd done with relativity, when I first, was doing the class and I was walking through it, and I really saw what his genius was, there's no way not to be in awe of what he did, of what his audacity, right? Because what happened was with Einstein, there was like this homework problem that everybody was working on, all the physicists were, and it had to do with light traveling through space. And, we knew light was a wave, and we knew that like sound as a wave needs air to move through it. So everyone was asking about what does light travel through? It was this thing called the luminiferous ether. Everybody was trying to figure out the luminiferous ether. And Einstein just said, you know what? I don't care. And he just invented a theory where there was no luminiferous ether. And that's how he came to the conclusion that time could flow at different speeds for different people moving relative to each other. And once you see that he was willing to do that, you see the genius. It's hard not just to be like, wow, this man was incredible. This man was something else.
Let's go to James in Virginia. Squeeze you in here, Jim. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks a lot, George. Yeah, I know an astrophysicist sounds very impressive, but I don't think you've read Revelation at all in the Bible, because it's not, what you're saying is all science. It has nothing to do with what it says in Revelation. And in Revelation 21, and by the way, Revelation starts out the Word of God and testimony of Jesus Christ. You can't change or add to it. It's very serious stuff, this Revelation. You don't make anything up,
I think you're right, though, Jim. I mean, he is all science. Would you? And you would agree with that, Adam, wouldn't you?
Yeah, science has this way of answering questions, and that's what I'm sticking to. That's how I'm answering my questions. Other kinds of questions, questions about art, music, even spirituality, I'll turn to other sources. But here the question is about how we are going to find life in the universe scientifically.
Somebody should write a book called The Science of the Bible.
I bet there's a book like that.
If there isn't, it would be a bestseller. Looking at the Bible and everything in it based on a perspective of science, answering things like that. Like when they say God blew up Sodom and Gomorrah, the city, I think an atomic explosion took them out.
Yeah, I'm sure people have tried to look at, examine the Bible that way. But there's one thing, and I kind of talked about this in my book, is that, all scriptures, whether it's Buddhist or they weren't really meant to be read as like, they're poetic, right? They're speaking to something poetic in us. I don't mean that I'm not dissing it. It's the opposite. These highest feelings, these deep personal feelings we have of the experience of the beauty of the world are really about something that's beyond. It's not about fact or fiction. There, as the beautiful work, I've forgotten her name. She studies myth. Myth in the sense of, not like fake stories, but myth is these basic ways human beings encounter each other.
Hold on for a second, Adam. We're at a break. We'll come back and wrap things up and take final calls. And we're back with our final segment with Adam Frank, the astrophysicist. His book is called The Little Book of Aliens. His website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Adam, I'll let you finish your thought that you were talking about as we were talking about the biblical implications about all of this. And you were talking about a author who has written some myth books.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point that, I think when we think about science and religion, we should be careful not to try and turn religion into science. Right, that religion and spirituality speaks to something else in us, and the job is not to like prove that the scripture or the Buddhist scripture or a Hindu scripture or a Christian scripture relates to this scientific fact, because also scientific facts change. I just think they're kind of in different realms. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, very good. Next up, Beast of the Rockies, Joe in Long Island, New York. Hey, Joe, go ahead.
Adam, I have two quick questions. First is, there were two movies where guys got left behind on planets that I remember seeing. One was set in Mars. The guy was in a cave. and he didn't have time to make it back. Another was in Mortalium, where they gave the angle of this perspective of the guy running for the ship, and the ship starting to take off. So my question with that is, hypothetically, if experiments were being run on the moon, and these were like planned for years, and then there was somebody doing a moonwalk, and something happened where you could just pick up the experiments or pick up the one person, what do you do? And then my second question's about the Hindenburg and helium. What was the problem with the helium?
Okay, for the first question, are you talking about Robinson Crusoe on Mars? I watched that as a kid, and I loved that movie. Was that the one?
I think
also The Martian,
that's
where he gets left behind. But I loved Robinson Crusoe on Mars.
It was a classic, to be sure. Go ahead.
So good, so good. So, I think in general, what would happen is, right, if you're out there and you run out of oxygen, you're dead, right? There's really not a lot of hope for that. So I think, that's the great danger for astronauts exploring these kinds of planets. And then the second question, it was hydrogen, not helium.
That's right. The hydrogen is what exploded, right?
Well, yeah, hydrogen is. Now I think there's a next generation of lighter than air craft coming for us. Because, we want to get away from fossil fuels and everything. So, and even people, I think, are learning to work better with hydrogen. But, yeah, the Hindenburg, the problem was you do not want hydrogen around a flame.
What a horrible disaster that was in those days, Adam, wasn't it? I still remember the announcer. They used to play it in broadcast classes.
Yeah.
Talking
My
about
dad had that on a record. He had a record that also had the War of the Worlds, the 1938 radio show that everybody had freaked out about, and then it was also the Hindenburg was on that too. I remember that listening to that.
Orson Welles classic.
Oh, that was so realistic. It was so well done.
He actually had people believing aliens were landing.
Yeah, people were calling the police. I think somebody even committed suicide or something.
Yes,
it was so realistic, and they had no idea. The police had to call them and say, "You guys really need to step back here."
Bill in Los Angeles. Take it away, Bill.
Hi, George and Adam. Hey, Adam, I was also a graduate student in the 1980s at Columbia J School. I'm a former reporter, and I've been a big fan since my undergraduate days of Sir Karl Popper, the philosopher of science. Are you familiar with any of his work?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Falsifiability, yeah, his whole ideas.
Right. And in the last few years, I've noticed a trend among what I would call traditional science debunkers. And you're sort of, I'm not sure you're in that category, but you remind me of some of the people since you're friends with one of them, Seth Shostak. And I got to tell you, it takes a lot to convince me of something, but I think one thing that Popper emphasized was that whatever your feelings are or your inclinations, whatever data you have to make rational inferences from that data. And the state tonight that, well, there's not enough data, and us people in science, we need this and that. I would say that anybody with a brain does science on a daily basis. We just try to make sense of the world. And if you look at the UFO, the ufology from the 1950s, that you alluded to, by the way, there is overwhelming evidence based on the speed of the documented craft, and I'm talking military and experienced radar operators documenting speeds in 1952 that were 10 times anything the Soviets or the Americans were doing at that time. That's provable. And they were doing these 90-degree breakaways that George was talking about. And Al Chop of the Air Force said back at that time, these were interplanetary machines flying over our capital in 1952. And he was scared out of his mind, and so were the pilots chasing these things. And you fast forward to the Tic Tac, you get even more visual evidence of this stuff, and pilots who were shocked at 60,000 miles per hour, no visible means of propulsion, transmedium craft. You don't have to be a scientist to conclude that stuff is not made on Earth. And if it were, we'd be speaking Chinese or Russian right now, or we'd be conquering them. And we would not be investing our money in stupid conventional technology. Anybody with that technology would be king of the planet. So you guys really are going to have to start being more honest about the actual individual cases and start explaining where this stuff comes from without saying, well, we need more to make a conclusion. You've got plenty, and it's very clear this stuff is not from this planet.
No, he's not saying, Adam, you're dishonest. I want you to understand that.
Yeah, because, so like with that, so those Tic Tac videos, right? So when you look at those, you can, people have already shown, Nick West, for example, that the movements that you see on those, and remember, there's only 3 of those. There's really only 3 of those videos. They get chopped up a lot. We don't know when those instruments were refurbished. That's what the point I was making about when you do science, having somebody reporting radar data on paper from 50 years ago, you have to have your own instrument. I could never go to my colleagues and say, I discovered alien life on an alien world if I didn't know how my instrument behaved, if I didn't know, 6 ways to Friday. I'm just asking for the what happens with UAPs to have the same rules that I would apply to building a cell phone. So for example, there was at the NASA, one of the NASA panels, one of the scientists got up and looked at the data from the actual videos on those, I think it was GoFast, and using trigonometry, concluded it was moving at 40 miles an hour, right? So again, there's not data we can use. We would have used it if we could use it. So, I will stand pretty firm that there's not data that if you tried to use the kinds of data you are asking me to use and tried to build a cell phone, a transistor, or a cell phone, you'd have a brick. So, there shouldn't be special rules for UAPs that there are for the rest of science. But again, I want you to understand, I'm all for doing the transparent, open science. I think that would be a great thing to do. But up to now, there isn't the kind of data that you would use for any other kind of study. So that's where I'm coming from. I think I'm very open-minded. The most beautiful thing about science is that, and I talk about this in the book, is that it teaches you how to change your mind, right? And if the things I study in my everyday work are pretty out there, right? I'm right now doing a calculation about how long, if aliens came through 1 billion years ago and left a spaceship on the moon, how long would it last before it got eroded by micrometeorites? So, one of the things I'm really trying to show in the book is how science works, how we will apply that to finding life on alien worlds using telescopes, and how we would apply the same thing if we really wanted to have data to figure out what UAPs are one way or another.
Adam, would you be in shock if NASA came out and said, we're being visited by ETs?
No, I don't think I'd be in shock in the sense of, I think it's possible. That's why I'm doing that study, right? The Earth has been around.
Sure.
The source has been around for 4.5 billion years. It's possible somebody has come through at some point. I don't think NASA's hiding anything. Like that part doesn't make any sense to me. I've been working as, I've had NASA grants. I go to NASA for 30 years. I've never seen anybody like hiding in the halls and, sneaking anything. But like if NASA had evidence of that, if we found evidence in this open kind of way, I'd love it, right? That would be the coolest thing ever, So if we find evidence that, somebody came through, an alien civilization came through a long time ago, I'd love it, because that's, the only question I'm interested in, George, is has life happened elsewhere? That's exactly the burning question I want to know the answer to.
And our guess is yes.
This is what I'll say. I'm an alien optimist, looking at the same things that lots of other people look at, the number of planets. I'm an optimist. But as I always say, that and $3.99 will get me a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Right? My opinion doesn't matter. We need to be able to get the data so that we can answer that question in a way that all of us know for sure. That's going to be the beautiful moment.
West of the Rockies, Joe in Oregon. No, Joe in Olympia, Washington. Hey, Joe, go ahead.
Hey, George, it's a pleasure to speak with you. I just have a question for Adam and a real quick question for you.
Okay.
My question for you is, I hope you got my book and you liked it. I won't say the title if you don't want me to.
No, say the title.
It's called The Broken Mirror of Memory, Iraq and Other Tales. I sent you a copy. just for your consideration. And even if I never hear from you, I hope you enjoyed it.
You probably sent it to Los Angeles, right?
Yes, sir.
I will get it in a couple months when I get back.
Okay. I apologize for taking your time on that, sir. For Mr. Adam, what do you think the statistical possibilities are that some form of alien life has visited our planet in the past? I mean, do you think it's a complete statistical impossibility? Or
I don't just no. I wouldn't say it's the thing about probability is it requires counting, right? If I have a six-sided dice, if I know my dice is six-sided, then the probability of any face coming up is 1/6. So to do a proper statistical estimation, you have to have something to count. And in this case, it's hard for me to figure out how I would do that analysis because what is it I'm trying to count? But I certainly would say the Earth has been around a long time. If there were technological civilizations, then it is possible that somebody has come through sometime, and that's what we call it solar system SETI. There's active programs now where we're trying to figure out how we find some artifact left over. And it could be billions of years old, but it's hard for me to evaluate the probability. I think it's possible. I think it's a worthwhile avenue of study. I personally am more interested in, I've got these beautiful alien planets that I can study with my telescopes. But I do, I'm actually, like I said, I'm doing some work in that solar system study. So I think it's possible. That's why I certainly think it's possible.
Let's go to John in Florida. Go ahead, John. Good to have you with us.
Hi, George. Adam,
Hi.
Love your show, George. You really have a lot of fun data. even though I know that a lot of it is very true and already know some of the data, I still like to hear other people talk about what they've experienced.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you have great sponsors too. So my wife and I, when we met, we felt that we were had known each other before, that we were soulmates, and we were talking about different places we'd been and whether we had met before. And we were at the New York World's Fair on the same day in the same exhibit, but we didn't meet. And then we were watching Jimmy Buffett in the Flick Coffee House in Miami on the night from different sides of the room, but we didn't meet. And then I went into a counseling session for Dianetics, and I found an incident when we were actually together, and it was on a flying saucer when we were both crew and paired up there, and it was hit by an asteroid, and everybody was killed. And then I came out of the counseling session, and I saw my wife, and I said, "Oh, I found out where we were together before." And she said, "Oh, wow, you got to tell me. I said, "No, I can't because you haven't had counseling on it yet. It could affect you." And she said, "No, you got to tell me. So I said, "Okay, I'll tell you." And I told her about the spacesuit and everything. She went, "Oh, wow, that's amazing." The next morning, she called up to work, and she said, "Oh, I feel so terrible. I can't come in. My face is all swollen." And I said, "When did that happen?" And she said, "I don't know." And I said, "Was it after I told you about that incident when we were together?" And she said, after a minute's pause, she said, "Oh, yeah, wow." An hour later, she came in to work and said, "Oh, I feel much better now. My face isn't swollen anymore."
That's pretty dramatic stuff, John. We're wrapping things up, Adam. The name of the book, The Little Book of Aliens. Where do people get it?
They get it online or at their favorite bookstore. Also on my website, adamfrankscience.com. There's a link there that you can find to order the book.
Keep in touch with us, Adam, and if there's anything that breaks news-wise, come back on the show, okay?
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, George.
You take care of yourself. Adam Frank. Up next, investigative reporter Cheryl Jones with an incredible story of strange weirdness.